Hello, and welcome to our conversation about environmentalism, deep winter, 10,000 birds, and plenty more with John Luther Adams and Alex Ross. I'm Kate Nordstrom. I'm the executive and artistic director of the Great Northern. Every year, our festival shares dozens of performances, art installations, outdoor activations, and solutions-focused climate talks during the last week of January and the first week of February that invigorate mind and body. John Luther Adams' 10,000 Birds will be performed by Alarm Will Sound at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts this Sunday at 2 p.m. We want to thank the many organizations and individuals that contribute to the festival annually. And if you would like to support our ability to bring you this free programming, we ask you to consider making a donation on our website. It's thegreatnorthernfestival.com. So I am joining you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, on the indigenous land of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. I would love to invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, sharing where you are, and if you know the native lands that you are on, you can include that as well. We are honored to be in conversation today with John and Adam about how music can be part of the climate solution. And now for a couple bios. Pulitzer Prize and Grammy-winning composer John Luther Adams believes that music can do more than politics to change the world. In works such as Become Ocean, In the White Silence, and Canticles of the Holy Wind, Adam brings a sense of wonder that we feel outdoors into the concert hall. In outdoor works such as Inuksut and Sila, The Breath of the World, he employs music as a way to reclaim our connections with place, wherever we may be. Alex Ross has been the music critic of The New Yorker since 1996. He's the author of the books The Rest is Noise, Listening to Music, Listening to the 20th Century, Listen to This, another book, and Wagnerism, Art and Politics in the Shadow of Music. Welcome.
Thank you, Kate. And hello to everyone from Scotland to Alaska. I'm standing here now on the home ground of the Lipan and Mescalero Apache people. But for some 40 years, I made my home in interior Alaska, the home country of the Athabascan people, many different groups of Athabascan people in communities all over that vast region of Alaska. For most of the 1980s, I lived alone in a cabin without running water, a 1.5 mile hike from the road, half a mile through the woods to the cabin of my closest neighbor and my best friend, the music director of the Arctic Chamber Orchestra and the Fairbanks Symphony Orchestra, Gordon Wright. I've written about those years in my recent memoir, Silence is So Deep, and I'd like to begin today with by sharing with you an excerpt from that book. This is a piece called The End of Winter. In the winters that I lived alone in the woods, the deeper the cold and the darkness got, the better I liked it, or so I told myself. In March 1989, an extreme cold front, an omega block, settled over Alaska for 3 weeks. During one especially brutal week, the official high temperature in Fairbanks was never more than 40 degrees below zero. At my cabin in one of those notoriously cold, low-lying areas around town, it didn't rise above 55 below. Alaska's record low temperature set on my birthday, January 23rd in 1971, was 80 below zero. One night during the Omega Block, the National Weather Service predicted that this mark would be surpassed. Although it didn't happen, the thermometer at my cabin that evening registered 78 below zero. And then came the worst environmental disaster in Alaska's history. On March 24, 1989, the Exxon Valdez ran aground on Bligh Reef. spilling 30 million gallons or more of crude oil into the icy waters of Prince William Sound. That oil, originally extracted at Prudhoe Bay and transported 800 miles through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, eventually covered 1,300 miles of coastline and 11,000 square miles of ocean. As an Alaskan, I felt special. This feeling came from living close to the earth, surrounded by wild country, far from the urban centers of North America. It came from living among a relatively sparse human population with wild animals as our neighbors. It came from my friendships with Alaska Native people and from my experiences in villages where people have lived for countless centuries by the wisdom of the earth. It also came from the cold. The fierce, hard, clear winter cold of the northern interior felt as immutable as the peaks of the Alaska Range towering in the distance across the Tanana Flats. I couldn't have imagined how quickly and dramatically that would change. A decade later, on New Year's Eve, 1999, my wife and I hosted a bonfire at our house in the hills north of Fairbanks. As the 21st century dawned in Alaska, our thermometer read 57 degrees below zero. We and our friends reveled in it. But the following winter, the temperature in Fairbanks never reached 40 below. This was a first in the brief recorded history of local weather. However, it would quickly become the new normal. High temperature records began to be set with regularity in both summer and winter. I remember the first time that we saw lightning and heard thunder in December, which was followed by heavy freezing rain. It had always been that the roads around town were better in winter, when a hard crust of dry, compacted snow filled in all the potholes and offered plenty of traction. Now we had frequent freezing and thawing and treacherous glazes of thick black ice. One spring afternoon, while watching birds at a bog near our house, I was startled to hear the unmistakable call, "Kongaree," of a red-winged blackbird. This is a bird that I'd first come to know in Okefenokee Swamp, thousands of miles to the south in Georgia. It was certainly not a resident species of interior Alaska. Yet here it was. And ever since then, the redwings have appeared each spring in that same northern bog. During the next decade, we saw the climate of Alaska continue to warm at an accelerating rate. In a very real way, the Alaska that we knew was beginning to disappear. Meanwhile, the wildfire season increased in length and intensity. In 2004, it lasted all summer. From June through September, temperatures soared, and there was almost no precipitation. That summer, 6.3 million acres of Alaska, an area larger than the state of Vermont, went up in flames. In northern Alaska, summer is the season of endless daylight, and yet day after day, we didn't see the sun. The smell of smoke was omnipresent, and the air was dangerously polluted. The public was warned to limit exertion and stay indoors as much as possible. The Red Cross set up smoke respite centers to provide people with sanctuary from the oppressive conditions. Many fled south in search of cleaner air. In its magnitude and intensity, that fire season dramatically surpassed all those previously recorded. But subsequent summers have come all too close to matching it. Farther north, the changes have been even more alarming, as a phenomenon called Arctic acceleration has taken effect. Global warming is occurring twice as fast in the Arctic as in other regions of the Earth. For me, this is personal. I love Alaska with a passion that's almost erotic. I first stood on the shore of the Arctic Ocean in 1979. During the following 30 years, the thickness of ice in the Arctic Ocean decreased by 50%. By the middle of the new century, there will almost certainly be no more multi-year pack ice. Looking at satellite images of the retreat of the sea ice is like looking at photos of someone I love wasting away from a horrible disease. It is heartbreaking. For me, as for so many others, Alaska had been the geography of hope, the last great untouched place in North America. But now, in a few short decades, it's become one of the most threatened parts of this increasingly threatened Earth. Some may see promising new opportunities for wealth in an ice-free Arctic. But as the sea ice disappears and the waters rise, what will take the Arctic's place in the human imagination? The promise of the Arctic is no longer the promise of the pristine. The Arctic today is a place where we come face to face with the undeniable consequences of our own actions. We must find new ways of living on this earth. The changes we make must be profound. They must be worldwide, and they must happen now. As a composer, I believe that the best gift I can offer to our troubled world is music. Some composers choose to address the political issues of their times directly in their music. But although I've been politically active all my life, the heart of my music lies elsewhere, again, in the earth. In order to renew human culture, we sometimes need to step outside of culture, to remember that we're only a small part of the larger, older order of things. Although my work lies in culture, I search for my music at the intersection of human imagination and what we call nature, which of course is the ultimate source of everything that we are as individuals, as societies, and as a species. A friend of mine once observed that a piece like In the White Silence might one day come to be a kind of archaeological artifact of Alaska, the Alaska that we knew and loved. Maybe so, yet I want my music to be more than an elegy for what we have lost, more than a lamentation for a world that is melting. Music is my way of imagining how the world really is, how it might be, with or without us. Long before Europeans came to Northwest Alaska, Maniilaq, the Inupiaq prophet of the Kobuk River, predicted that there would come a time when a season would occur twice in succession. Ever since then, most people have believed that this prophecy would come to pass as 2 consecutive winters. But Maniilaq did not say. And today it seems more likely to come as 2 successive summers. What will Alaska be after the end of winter? I will not be there to find out. I'll only pray that there will still be people in Alaska, and that, like the first Alaskans, they will live far more lightly on this earth than we have. Thank you for listening. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome in my good friend, Alex Ross. Hey, Alex.
John, greetings.
And I think we have a few minutes to do what you and I seem to enjoy doing most, that is talking about music.
Absolutely. I'm speaking to you from land originally belonging to the Tongva people, known as Tovangar, also called Los Angeles. And it's a great pleasure to be a part of this Great Northern Festival. And of course, speaking to John, whom I first met, I think, back in 2007 in Seattle, 2006, 2007, Seattle Chamber Players gathering, at which John was one of the composers. And he played a tape of his orchestral work, Dark Waves, which utterly mesmerized me. And I began talking with him and formed a plan to visit him in Fairbanks and to write about his work and his life there. That formed one of my favorite pieces of profiles that I've ever done for The New Yorker. It came out in 2008. It was called Song of the Earth. And a great experience for me, not only to spend time with you, but to see Alaska. I'd never been there before, and to see it through your eyes and through your ears was an extraordinary opportunity for me. So yeah, let's just pick up from your reading and from your experience of Alaska, and perhaps just tell the to you familiar, but perhaps to others unknown story of how you came there originally, and what drew you to Alaska, having spent a lot of your youth in largely urban or suburban environments on the East Coast and down south, and then coming to Los Angeles area to study at CalArts, which I think was a turning point in terms of your relationship with music and with nature, and then going on from there up to Alaska.
How much time do we have?
Several hours at least, I think.
Well, no, I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say than what I have to say, Alex. But sure, let me see if I can sketch the story. I grew up all over the lower 48 states. My dad was with the phone company back when there was only one phone company. And it was a little bit like being a military brat. We moved every few years from the deep south to the suburbs of New York City, where we lived for longer than any place else during my childhood. So my most formative years were in, ironically, in the suburbs of northern New Jersey. But I found myself at the tender age of 19 in the inaugural year of the new campus at the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts. And it was a life-changing experience for me in every way. I already knew that I wanted to be a composer, that I wanted to make my life in music, but this was total immersion. And I had the supreme dumb luck to be there at a magical moment. So many of my Wadada Leo Smith, Peter Garland, Michael Byron, Lois Vierk, these wonderful composers were my friends and my classmates. And I had the supreme good fortune to study with the great James Tinney, which made all the difference in my musical life. The other way in which I'm eternally grateful to Los Angeles is that it set me off in search of home. The whole time that I was at CalArts, I was profoundly homesick, but I didn't know where home was. People would talk about, oh, I'm going home, and I didn't really understand what that meant. But I realized that I had this deep, inarticulate hunger to find a place to which I could belong deeply. And I left CalArts. I was in the first graduating class at CalArts in 1973, and moved to an old farmstead in rural Georgia and began transcribing the music of birds, which was a moment of great, a moment of musical epiphany for me. That was really in some ways the beginning of my life's work. But while I was living in that farmhouse, I made my first trip to Alaska. And that was 1975, the summer of 1975. And from the first moment that I set foot on Alaskan soil, I knew that I had come home. And to this day, although we now live in the Chihuahuan Desert, and we've lived in the Atacama Desert in Chile and the Sonoran Desert in Mexico this last decade since leaving Alaska, even so, and I feel at home in all of those places, but when I think of home, I will always think of interior Alaska.
Mm-hmm. So we have this rubric of the festival, the Great Northern, sort of ideas about North, and then we have in musical tradition, I think a long history of composers engaging with different ideas of North. Glenn Gould, of course, gave a fascinating talk on the subject of the idea of North. And it's something that's always fascinated me, but also sort of maybe sort of hesitant at times to spell it out or to sort of feel as though I've really grasped the relationship ultimately between music and particular landscapes. Because I seem to be drawn to a great deal of music that comes from northern places. As a teenager, I fell absolutely in love with the music of Sibelius, and then I began exploring many other Nordic composers. And it happens that two of the major profiles that I've done have been of northern-oriented artists, you and Björk from Iceland, and so sort of something in me responds to it. But then I'm never sure. Does the music actually emanate from these places, or am I drawn to a certain kind of sound, a certain kind of spaciousness, a certain kind of stillness of landscape that may have some intrinsic connection with the landscape, or it may have it has so many other sort of deeper musical sources. One thinks of Morton Feldman, and a composer who had a great effect on you, and also someone who means a great deal to me, who is in no way northern, a New York guy.
He loved the Hudson River School of Painters, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do you spell this all out? Do you say that, was there music that began emanating to you after you moved to Alaska, or was there music in your head that sort of chimed with, the impressions that you received in Alaska, and so there was a convergence? Or how would you ultimately try to articulate that?
I'm not sure that I would. That's your job, Alex. You're the critic.
Okay.
I think the composer the composer is usually the last person to know what is really going on in the music. But I've thought about this from time to time over the years, and I've written about it occasionally. Which came first? This is the chicken or egg question, the music or Alaska? And I'm not sure there is a simple answer. It's funny. I composed "Become Desert" in Mexico, in the Sonoran Desert, a desert that I love profoundly. But it was all written in Mexico. But it wasn't until we arrived in the Atacama Desert in Chile, where we lived for 2 years, that I realized, oh, this is the place I've been imagining and become desert. This is the place I've been trying to compose. So, it's a little bit like that old saw about God, right? If Alaska didn't exist, it would be necessary to imagine Alaska, to invent Alaska. But I think what happened in the music, and really, you're probably a more astute observer of this than I am. But I think over the years, the music evolved. It grew and evolved from being music about Alaska, about place, to I hope, music that in some ways embodied Alaska, became Alaska, and at the same time became its own inherently musical place, which I don't know what the word I want is. It extends beyond the place, the geography in which it was born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. You touched on this idea of sort of the political context for your music, and of course your talk. So eloquently articulates the crisis that is taking place in Alaska and in so many other places. You know, the wildfire season here in Los Angeles sometimes goes almost year-round extremes of climate. And yet at the same time, you know, you wish to maintain for your music a certain independence. You know, it's as if you are a political composer who doesn't write political music or doesn't write, you know, openly political music. How do you articulate that balance? And have you ever been tempted really to write a piece that is, you know, much more aggressive on the surface in terms of that articulation? Or do you feel that the most effective vessel for such messages is a work that can assume different guises and can sort of arrive to audiences as something much more vague or sort of universal in import?
Yeah, it's again, that's a great imponderable question, which I've been trying to ponder for decades. Like all of us these days, you know, I'm asking myself, well, what can I do? You know, in the face of increasing violence and political unrest and injustice, inequality, and the mother of all these issues, refugee crises rising all over the world. The mother of all these issues is of course anthropogenic climate change. So how can I possibly address this? And I guess I believe in it's almost like a separation of church and state kind of thing. The music is music, and I was marching in the streets and in civil rights and anti-war demonstrations before I could vote. I was an environmental activist into my mid-30s, but I left activism. I left politics, realizing, first of all, that I didn't have the temperament. I just didn't, quite frankly, have the courage or the stamina for a life in politics. But you know, I completely dedicated myself to my life as an artist in the belief, with a leap of faith, that in its own way, art can matter every bit as much as politics. And I got to say, over the years, I've come to think, no, I was wrong. Art matters more than politics, and it always has. If you look at human history, the ideas don't come from politics. The ideas that change the world do not come from the so-called leaders. They come from the best of creative thought, from writers and painters and composers, and also, I would say, in the last couple of 100 years, from scientists, from ecologists and quantum physicists and people who have dedicated their lives to asking questions through science. So, you know, I've staked my life on it, and I'm not about to. I'm not about to surrender now. I guess part of it too, Alex, is that I feel that all too often political art is not very effective as art or as politics. And ultimately, my first responsibility as a composer is to the music. And look, if the music doesn't touch you, if it doesn't provoke you, if it doesn't move you in some way, then anything the composer might say, conversations like this, books, interviews, it's meaningless. The music has to come first. And it's my hope that I may be able to leave something behind that will be of use to future generations, to the people who will have to sort through the rubble that my generation is leaving to them, and imagine new ways of being in the world. So, yeah, it's all it's all inextricably tied together in my mind and in my heart. But when I set out to compose a piece of music, the music needs to come first.
Right. Yeah, you have to be loyal to the sounds that are in your head first and foremost, which is something that I find in the wider world people have trouble grasping about composers, and really treating composers as artists who have a vision, and sort of this constant kind of asking of composers, why don't you write like this, instead of that, and
or a particular assignment, we'd like you to write a woodwind quintet.
Well, but as if one can
right.
choose the sound in your head, and it's just something that people tend not to ask of novelists, who are recognized as sort of having their stories sort of built up from their experiences or their impressions. It's the same with composers.
Yeah, I guess I'd never really thought of it in those terms, but it has the ring of truth. And not to get too rarefied about this, but in addition to trying to help save the world in that wonderfully self-important human way, right? Ours is not to save the earth. Ours is to save ourselves, collectively and individually. And for me, the practice of my art, my daily work in my studio is the practice of my faith. As my dear friend, the late Barry Lopez would always say, our work is our prayer. And so that's the inner part of it. That's where it comes from, in the soul, in addition to this idea of service to the world. And then look, there's also just the fun, or at least the excitement of discovery, the sense of possibility, of asking new questions in music. Well, what would happen if? What would it sound like if? And I've been following that curiosity all my life. And so it's this combination of things, this idea of sort of a spiritual practice, a form of prayer, my best gift to our troubled world, and also just the sheer fascination, the wonder of discovering.
Mm-hmm. For quite a long time in your career, you were something of a loner, not simply geographically, but also culturally. You were devoted to a sound that had a following, and you had many colleagues who were like-minded, but it was something sort of rather outside of the mainstream of what we considered new music in especially sort of the 1980s and 1990s. And as kind of minimalism had its great moments. You are a composer who has ties with a lot of the composers in the minimalist tradition, but your music simply doesn't resemble that style, and if you want to call it a style, in a great many ways. I mean, you have your own voice. But I think now, in recent, in the past 10 or 15 years, you have become more widely known, and you must feel, especially when you look at younger composers, sort of the preoccupation of younger composers, sort of less isolated. I mean, I think you are someone who was looked to as a model in all kinds of ways, both I think in the substance of your music and in the conduct of your career, and sort of looking ahead to the next excerpt that you're going to read, sort of maybe talk a little bit about your sense of your place in the present and in the future of music right now.
Again, I would put it back on you in a sense. That's your job. I honestly, I don't. I try not to think too much about. I think every day about, well, what am I leaving behind? So legacy in that sense. I mean, I turned 70 last week, so it's time to be thinking about getting things in order and what I'm going to leave. But as far as trying to figure out how it all fits together in musical or cultural history, I will leave that to better minds than mine, such as yours. But I do think what keeps me going every day, what keeps me going to my studio is that sense of devotion to the music, but also my sense of love for and faith in the next generations. And when I say that, I mean, yes, young composers who are coming along and making marvelous new music that I could never have imagined, but also young people in whatever discipline, in whatever walk of life, as they say, all of whom are asking that question: what can I do? And of course, for each one of us, each one of them, the answer will be different. But my hope is that maybe I'll leave something behind that will, in some way, be useful to someone that I will never know, who may, in fact, change the world. I think of a well-known social misfit like Henry David Thoreau, who people still denigrate as kind of self-absorbed and misanthropic and a human failure. Well, yeah, maybe so. We should all be such human failures, and that we are all flawed, deeply flawed individuals, and we do the best we can. And what turns out that that deeply flawed individual, Mr. Thoreau, did in fact change the world, because he inspired Mahatma Gandhi. He inspired Martin Luther King Jr., people who really did change the world. So maybe that's an aspiration, a not so secret aspiration that I have for my work.
Well, let's hear your second excerpt, which I think will flow very, very obviously out of what you've just said.
Yeah, thank you, and maybe in a more coherent and formal way. This is in a sense my love letter to the next generations. To you. It bears an inscription. Earth, nothing more. Earth, nothing less. And let that be enough for you. Pedro Salinas. You and I will never meet, but you are always with me. When I'm walking alone, when I'm working in my studio, when I lie awake in the night, I think of you. The tenderness I feel for you gives meaning to my days. Imagining the world you will inhabit, the changes to the earth, the struggles you will face in your life, I can only hope that in the life that remains to me, I may be able to leave something that may be of use to you as you confront the hell that seems to lie ahead. In the past, art had the power to startle us awake, to call us to attention, to provoke new ways of hearing and seeing. Now, in this time of constant crisis and commodified fear, it may be that the best art can give is the full expression of our grief and some measure of clarity, solace, and courage. Many who've come before me have given me courage. Now it's my turn to leave for you whatever modest gifts I may have to offer. Yet, as I act on my faith in you, as I work with you in my heart and mind, I realize that I'm still the recipient of the gift. It is you who give me the courage to continue. My generation has failed as custodians of the earth, and as keepers of humanity. You now are the hope of the world. It is you who will lead us out of this darkness of our own making. You will reject hatred. You will challenge ignorance. You will resist the politics of death and power for its own sake. You will refuse to be governed by fear. You will change injustice into inequality. You will transform the economics of plunder into communities living within the limits of biology. You will reject the theology of the apocalypse. You will stop waiting for the end of the world. You will give up the conceit of escaping to other planets. You will live in the knowledge that this earth is our only home. You will stop the destruction of our climate. You will walk back from the brink of extinction. You will eschew joyless possessions and hollow entertainments calculated to make us forget. You will reclaim imagination. You will remember truths that we have forgotten. You will speak ancient wisdom in new words. You will discover music that I cannot imagine. You will create new cultures. You will celebrate what it means to be human. You will remember that we are also animals. You will live by the knowledge that our true nature lies in creation. My dream has been to work on the edge of this culture of decay, to try and imagine a culture of renewal that I will not live to inhabit, to listen to the music of the earth, to learn from the birds and the wind and the ground beneath my feet, to feel my small, fleeting presence within the immensity of deep time, to come home. I've sat in a forest learning the songs of birds. I've stood on the tundra with a wind harp on my head, feeling the breath of the world flow down through my body and into the earth. I've been almost swept away by the dark waves of a glacier crashing into the sea. In the stillness of the desert, I have heard the singing of the light. I have known places where I could imagine myself standing on the earth before we humans arrived and after we have gone. In the music I've been given, I hope you may hear some echo of this world I have known and loved so well. And perhaps that music may encourage you toward new visions of how the world might be and how we might find our true place in the mysterious matrix of life. Imperfect music and a few rough words are all that I have to offer you. I'm a man writing love letters to someone I will never know. I seal these notes in bottles and toss them into a churning sea, hoping that one day they may find you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, we just have a few minutes left, and so let's return to the music itself, and particularly talk about two pieces. One, that audiences at the Great Northern Festival will hear shortly, 10,000 Birds, Alarm Will Sound. And then music that we're going to hear as we go out here. Your very famous work, Become Ocean. And of course, these two pieces both connect very obviously with what you've just said about representations of the eternal presence of nature, nature voices, with or without humanity, sort of seemingly without. Although when I listen to Become Ocean, I always feel a great ambiguity in terms of the beauty, the power of this entity that you evoke in sound, but also the danger that it represents to us as we exert our false delusional domination over nature. But yeah, speak about these two very different pieces, and in a sense, not to tell people what to listen for, but simply perhaps just where they stemmed from and what they represent for you.
Sure. You know, it's true that like my snapshots, my musical compositions rarely, if ever, include human figures, a human presence. That's by design. I'm not interested in telling you a story or in the music or expressing my own feelings. The music is open and seemingly empty to allow space for you, the listener, to find your own way through it and have an experience that maybe the composer never could have imagined. You know, as I said earlier, my life's work in a very real way began with birds. There are by now some earlier pieces that I've returned to and revised, but really, in a sense, Opus 1 is a little collection of pieces for piccolos and percussion called Songbird Songs, which began with my setting of the music of the wood thrush, which, as I came to learn later, was also the favorite bird song of Henry David Thoreau. But over the years, I've returned to birdsong again and again as a source for my music. With the self-consciousness of the young artiste, in my late 20s, I put birds down because I didn't want it to become a thing. I didn't want to be, sort of the American Messiaen. I didn't want it to be a shtick, but I keep coming back to them. And I always said to myself, well, maybe at the end of my life, and I'm old, I'll come back to birds. Looks like that might be happening. There's a big choral piece from a few years ago called Canticles of the Holy Wind, which is the first time I've tried to translate the music of birds as I hear it into music for human voices. It was done for the Crossing Choir. And then I embarked on this ambitious project with Alarm Will Sound, the wonderful chamber orchestra, and called 10,000 Birds. And of course, 10,000 is the approximate number of bird species that are currently alive on the Earth. I'm afraid it's minus 10,000 and counting. But this is a piece for free-range musicians and free-range audience, and it's intended, it could be done in a concert hall, but it's intended, as many of my recent works are, outdoor and indoor works, to be in a more open environment where people can root themselves in one position and let the music revolve around them, or people can follow their ears through a sort of enchanted garden. And by now, the marvelous musicians of Alarm Will Sound own this music and understand this music in a much deeper way than the composer does. And I guarantee anyone who can be there this weekend to hear it is in for a treat. I guess our exit music to wrap up here is, as you say, perhaps my best known piece, Become Ocean. It started actually with that piece that you heard when we first met, Alex, a 12.5-minute piece called Dark Waves. It's huge, big piece for electronic sounds and symphony orchestra that seemed to me like it was something I hadn't heard before. It was a strange new world of sound that I wanted to explore more. And so that grew to become Ocean. And I love the way that this piece seems to have captured people's imaginations in different ways. Again, in ways that I could never have imagined myself. Someone joked that Inuksut, my big outdoor percussion work, is my In C, Terry Riley's seminal piece that everyone plays in community all the time, all over the world. Inuksut is my NC. And if so, then maybe Become Ocean is my bolero, right?
Well, perhaps. Yeah, for me, it's a piece that I remain in awe of. I was at the world premiere in Seattle, and I have such a distinct memory that I'll never forget of experiencing the piece for the first time, listening to it, absorbing it as a soundscape, as a sort of deeply beguiling kind of wash of atmosphere, of orchestral atmosphere, and sort of without really sort of perceiving the innards of it, immediately. And then I flew from Seattle to Santa Fe, and I was in Santa Fe preparing to work on another profile of Joyce DiDonato, and I was writing about Become Ocean, and I had the score. And I began to see how it worked, and I began to realize the formal complexity and the formal rigor of this work that sort of can make, I think, on first impression, such a just a sort of sensuous. There's a sort of sensuous, bewitching quality, to the surface of the music. But then below the surface, you have this rigor, you have this complexity, you have these processes that are set in motion and really continue operating sort of their own accord, almost. And so there's a ambiguity there, I feel, between surface beauty and formal rigor, which mirrors, in a sense, without at all being explicit, the potential, let's say, the potential messages of the work, the beauty of the ocean, as we look at it, but then the power of the ocean, the threat, that it poses to us because of the threat that we pose to it and to the entire Earth. And so sort of something about these combinations of sort of contrasting qualities in the score itself, on just sort of purely kind of note to note level, chime with, again, as I say, sort of messages that I might perceive that others might not. Nothing is graven in stone, but yeah, it's an astonishing creation among many other astonishing creations of yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it still sounds good to me. I don't listen to it, but when I do hear it, it still reveals something to me, which, if you think about paintings or pieces of music or books that you return to again and again, maybe that's a hallmark of art, is that there's always something new to discover. And I always say, as a composer, the music knows more than I do. Mark Rothko, people would tell Rothko, "Oh, you're such a brilliant colorist," and Rothko would say, "No, damn it, you don't understand. I'm a formalist." Because beneath the surface of those alluring, mystical, floating colors of a Rothko is an absolutely pristine, perfectly proportioned geometry. So in a similar way, I always think of myself as a formalist. Of course, I want the music to have it all, and why can't it be rigorously formal and ravishingly beautiful? I guess if push came to shove, I'd go with the sensuous, but it's not necessary to make that choice. And I think I often say that the formality, the mathematics, if you will, the geometry of the music protects the music from the bad taste of the composer. So it makes it, it's about something else. It's not about invention. It's about discovery. And I aspire to to hearing something I haven't heard before that I don't fully understand, that I can get lost in. And I want the same for you as a listener.
Wonderful. Well, I think our time has expired, and we will hear some minutes of Become Ocean as we go out. But just to say thank you so much, John, for this conversation, and to the great Northern Festival and Kate Nordstrom for inviting us. And thank you all.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks to the Great Northern for hosting us. And be well, everyone. Take care of one another.